Okay, we're live.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to City York Council's Economy and Place Policy and Scrutiny Committee. I'm Councillor Simon Daubeny, and I shall be chairing tonight's meeting. For the benefit of anyone who's watching the streamed video at a later date, today's date is Tuesday, 25th of May, 2021. This meeting is being live streamed and recorded. If you're watching the remote council meeting for the first time, you'll see members of the committee denoted by the notation CLLR before their names. Officers of the council will have their cameras switched off until they join the discussion, and when they first do so, I would ask that they give their names and job titles. Behind the scenes are other workers, officers, who regulate the meeting and ensure the IT works smoothly. I'm particularly grateful for their help this evening. When members or officers wish to speak, they will raise a virtual hand, which I shall see, but will not be visible to viewers at home. For a supplementary question, they will raise a physical hand. I shall endeavour to call people to speak in the order in which they raise their hands. This meeting is scheduled to start at 5:30, and I propose to take a short break of about 10 minutes around 7 p.m. I hope to conclude the meeting around 8 o'clock. We have a number of invited guests joining us this evening from the York Skills and Employment Board, to whom I extend a warm welcome and thank them for giving of their valuable time to contribute to our discussions tonight. They are Lee Probert, the Chief Executive and Principal, York College, and Chair of the Skills Board; Councillor Andrew Waller, Executive Member of Economy and Strategic Planning, City of York Council; Amanda Stalvaratnam, Associate Director of Research and Enterprise at University of York, and Chair of the Skills Board Task and Finish Group; Dr. Tim Whitaker, CEO and Principal at Askham Bryan College and member of the Skills Board; Professor Robert Mortimer, Pro Vice Chancellor, Research and Knowledge Transfer, York St John University, also member of the Skills Board. Welcome to you all this evening. We have apologies this evening from Councillor Gilbane, whose place has been taken by Councillor Norman, and we all extend a warm welcome to him. As I'm chairing this evening, in place of Councillor Gilbane, we shall need to elect a Vice Chair in case my connection fails. Would anyone like to volunteer for the position of Vice Chair for this evening, please? Councillor Douglas, can I have a seconder for that, please?
I'll second that.
Thank you very much. Right, onto our agenda. Declarations of interest. At this point, members are asked to declare any personal interest not included on the register of interests, any prejudicial interests, or any disclosable pecuniary interests, which they may have in respect of business on the agenda. In the interest of transparency, I'd like to declare I'm the Chair of the York Learning Improvement Board. Do any other members have anything to add, please? Councillor Pearson.
Thank you, Councillor Daubeny. Yeah, it's just to say that I am technically an apprentice within the workplace, so I am on an apprenticeship scheme. But other than that, I don't think it's prejudicial.
Right, thank you very much. Anyone else? Right, thank you very much. Minutes. We now need to approve the minutes of the committee meetings held on the 23rd of February and 25th of March of this year. Are there any issues arising from the minutes, please, that people wish to point out? Any errors they want to? Councillor Douglas.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to highlight what I feel is an omission on the minutes from the 25th of March on item 14, which was the discussion we had around recycling. And I remember that both myself and Councillor Taylor felt as though the information provided to the committee members wasn't sufficient for us to make a decision, and I particularly highlighted the financial information that was missing from the report, and therefore we felt that we couldn't make a recommendation to the executive member, and I felt that should be noted. Okay, thank you very much. This is noted.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I would agree with that.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Can I have a proposal that we accept the minutes subject to those conditions that Councillor Douglas has mentioned? Councillor Douglas, thank you. seconding Councillor Pearson. Thank you both very much. On to public participation. I understand we have no public speakers registered to speak at tonight's meeting, and therefore I propose we go on to the first main item of our agenda, item 4, the ongoing economic recovery strategy update. And we focus under this agenda item on the one-year plan, Skills for Employment in York, delivered through York Skills and Employment Board. This board is a partnership made up of representatives from employers, employees, education and the council. Starting from September last year, the board has actively driven the development of the one-year plan, Skills for Employment. Our guests from the board are key stakeholders of the education and skills sector in the city and are joining us tonight to take part in the key debate. The one-year plan, Skills for Employment in York, went to Council-wide decision session on 23rd of March and has been attached to the committee papers for your information. I wonder if Alison Edson could introduce the topic by giving us a brief 5-minute introduction to the report in Appendix A. Would that be all right, Alison? Afraid we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
We can. Thank you, Alison.
I was agreeing, saying absolutely, I'll give you an update.
Thank you very much.
So really just allowing for the time, it's just to say that partners have been working together for best part of a year now, around helping people through change was the one-year priority, and really about what we can do on the ground, as well as laying the foundations for the longer term skills strategy. And as you'll see in the paper that you've attached there, we've got key priority or commitment areas. And the one-year plan particularly talks about York Works. So this is how we support individuals, those that are entering or re-entering the workplace, that need to retrain or upskill, particularly those impacted by the pandemic. Another commitment is around employers and empowering them to ensure that they can access the skills support that's available to help them plan, diversify and grow. Provision is really much around that partnership and how we work together to, as I say, secure that future as well for the city. But right now, make the most of the national, regional and local provision that's been coming on stream over recent months and will continue to do so. And then education to employment and self-employment is that pipeline piece, and that's leaving education at any age. And it's about really connecting people with the opportunities in the local labour market and helping them have the information that's needed to make informed decisions about where they take their next steps. And as I say, that includes entrepreneurship and self-employment. And then supporting all of that is the COVID economic response communication strategy, because a lot of this is around signposting and supporting people to access what's there, as well as helping to shape and inform what we want for the future. So that's the key focus of the work for helping people through change and this one-year plan. What that original paper also does is set out the context of how we've actually been working together in that really strong partnership approach. So you've mentioned the Skills and Employment Board and the type of partners that sit on that strategic board that drive this work forward. We also have a task and finish group that's chaired by our colleague, so Amanda, who's on the call this evening from University of York, but with all of the partners from the education institutions and feeding in that employer voice and views of other stakeholders. We actually work together to help build the evidence base. So capturing that information, actually working on the detail of the plan. So where I've talked about those commitments, there are some priority projects that we are leading, and each of those institutions are leading one of those areas. So it's purely partnership. It's not about the council saying this is what we have to do. It's about us working across the city with people to make things happen. And as I say, we've got communications that run alongside all of this. We're at the point now where we're also working with wider groups of stakeholders to actually deliver some of those projects on the ground. And alongside that, as I say, I've mentioned the evidence base. Alongside that, we are working on the longer term strategy. So a real focus on 2 to 5 years and what can be done around the infrastructure and the partnerships and the interventions that are needed, with a view to those 21st century jobs and building on all of the good practice and the opportunities that have come out of the pandemic, as well as what's unique and sets York apart. So that's the work that we're continuing at the moment, and you'll hear much more tonight from partners as well around our aspirations and what we're looking to deliver under that.
Thank you, Alison. That's very helpful. I think it would be appropriate to offer each of our guests this evening the chance to speak first, to introduce their work, and then I shall ask committee members to join in the discussion in the normal way. Perhaps our guests will be kind enough to introduce themselves and their role on the board when they first speak to us. Can I begin, however, by inviting Councillor Waller, our Executive Member for Economy and Strategic Planning, to open the discussions. Councillor Waller.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak with you. We've had a number of scrutiny discussions on this subject, and I think it's important that there is this level of discussion and also bringing in members from the Skills Board. I think the priority has been to respond to the impact of COVID on employment, recognising that people have in the city lost their jobs, and recognising that there are young people who are anxious about gaining the experience, the work experience and training that will help them apply for jobs. And I think it is important to thank staff and all partners for doing all of this during a pandemic and working in very different ways that we're familiar with. And I think it's a tribute that we've developed this far. So the board does contain a range of representative voices from FSB, Chamber, and from the employee side, the TUC. And I chip in on the community side, because I recognise that all councillors will be meeting people who are concerned about what's happening, and the 1-year skills plan was very much responding to that and connecting with all of the announcements from government about there were pipelines of funding coming forward, and it's making sure that those pipelines connected with what was going on the ground. I'm grateful to the ideas that came out of Business Week in the skills session. That was very helpful in crystallising some of the discussions on green jobs, on the transformation that was already happening to the economy, which has been accelerated by the way that COVID has impacted on us, and the connection with the community hubs. I think in order that people appreciate what's available, it is important to get that message into the community. So with that as a preface, I'm happy to hand back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Waller. I wonder now, perhaps I could invite the Chair of the Board, Lee Probert, to speak to us on the work which has been going on.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to talk to councillors this evening about the work. I guess the starting point was that this work was born of an agenda from the Higher York Board, which is a partnership of the two universities in the city, both colleges and the local authority. And as we approach the kind of mid-term of the pandemic, began to wonder, well, what are likely to be the education consequences of this pandemic, and how might we imagine what interventions are required? And what became pretty obvious very quickly is that we wouldn't be able to conceive a strategy on our own to deal with the potential skills consequences arising from the pandemic. And therefore, we decided that we should, in partnership, have an Employment and Skills Board for the city, which had a broad range of voices, including those providers, but inviting in providers from the independent training provider sector, including an ongoing involvement from the local authority, but also representatives of business, whether direct from their own business or, as Councillor Waller indicated, Federation of Small Business, Chamber of Commerce, and also the employee voice through the TUC. We then set about trying to determine, well, how can we chunk this up to make it meaningful if we're going to take some actions which have traction and have an impact in the city for citizens that we serve now, but citizens that might need to benefit from an education skills intervention into the future. And therefore, we anticipate that over 10 years, this strategy will have 3 chapters. We started with year 1. What are the things that we need to do straight away? Who's been most affected by the pandemic, and how can we orientate those people back into work as quickly as possible? We then anticipated a 2 to 5 year section of the strategy. What are the investments that we might need to make on the provider side, and what are employers telling us about the changing nature of their businesses in that medium term? And then a slightly longer term view, 6 to 10 years, with perhaps a less clear specifics about what might be happening on both the supply and demand side, but nonetheless wanted to leverage in benefit from investments that we might make in that early period. I guess the most important thing about our approach to this is that we have set about doing it in partnership with employers, providers, and the local authority, so that we're as clear as we can be that it's got a range of voices shaping it, that we've had good access to the evidence base, including from the local enterprise partnership, and therefore that the decisions that we make and the recommendations that we make within that strategy can be signed up to by all partners, so that we have an ongoing commitment to delivering against the priorities that we set out. And from my own perspective as the principal at York College, we are benefiting from that insight into trends that employers are articulating, being able to clarify some of the opportunity that already exists on the supply side, as it were, from colleges and universities, and already start to make some of those connections. So I think that this will be a very positive piece of work for the city over a substantial period of time.
Thank you very much, Lee. Can I pass now perhaps to Amanda Silver-Outnam and ask if Amanda wants to add some words to those thoughts? You're muted, I think, Amanda.
Sorry, classic.
We've all done it, don't worry.
Yes, sorry. Thanks, Councillor. And thank you, everybody, for the opportunity to talk to you tonight. Yeah, my role within the group has been to run the Task and Finish group, and they have been the teams that we set off working on the various commitments. So as Alison mentioned in her introduction, we have 4 core commitments for the 1-year plan. And for each of those, we have a Task and Finish group made up of representatives from each of the partners, including the council, and also representation or consultation with businesses and other relevant bodies for each of those commitment groups. And I guess from my perspective, having been in York for kind of 20 odd years and worked through the whole kind of Higher York agenda over many, many years, I think what I've seen with this plan, both the kind of 1-year plan, but also the 10-year strategy, is a real desire from all partners to work together. I think it's been a really positive experience, and actually is really showing how, as a city, we can work towards a kind of single or a number of goals to support both businesses and individuals across the city. And I think what this has highlighted is the need for an organisation like Higher York that brings that together and facilitates the opportunity, but also having a very kind of clear vision from the partners as to what we want to achieve. And obviously it changed, I think, because of the pandemic. We are probably doing things some things differently from what we might have done had we not been coming out of a pandemic. But I think the principles around engaging employers, engaging individuals, and communicating the offer is the same regardless of where we are now in terms of the pandemic, but actually is a foundational issue in terms of what we should be trying to achieve across the city. So it's been really positive. I'm very open to kind of questions about some of the kind of actual activities we've been doing and what we're going to deliver from each of those commitments in the 1 year, but also in the kind of 10-year plan as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. That's very helpful. I'd like to give Tim Whitaker a chance to speak at this point, if you'd like to. Are you there, Tim? I think Tim's on his phone, his mobile. Can you hear us, Tim? Ah.
Hi, I can hear you now. Sorry, apologies for that.
That's all right, don't worry.
I'd just like to, again, thank all members for inviting us to this session. It's very helpful. I don't actually have too much more to add because Lee certainly covered off the context of what we're doing and why we're formed and how we're working in a collaborative and joined up way. Obviously, Askham Bryan College is slightly different in that we are one of only 10 specialist independent land-based colleges in the whole of England. So our sort of portfolio of provision is slightly different, but notwithstanding that, we do work very closely across the city, and we have a significant amount of engagement, particularly within NEET and at level 1, level 2, and foundation learning. I think I'll finish there, but obviously happy to take questions as the session progresses.
That's fine, Tim. Thank you very much indeed. Would Rob like to join us in the discussion? Rob Mortimer, anything you'd like to add to what your colleagues have said, Rob?
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to tell you what I've been doing as a commitment lead. So I've got a slightly different role, just to give you an idea of the kinds of things we're doing. So at the moment, we're doing a scoping out a digital pilot, all 4 institutions, plus we have employers and other members on our team. So we're looking at digital skills provision. We're looking at existing funding and opportunities and what's coming down the line from government. And then we're trying to identify what particular groups of individuals will need in terms of basic foundational digital skills. So we're looking at what individuals who don't have digital skills will need. We're looking at active job seekers and what skills they will need. We're looking at skills for the workplace. We're looking at skills that businesses are identifying they need to build a picture of what's available, what gaps in provision there are, what emerging needs there are, and then that allows the 4 institutions, educational institutions, to plan together provision that can help fill those gaps, and also to think about how we communicate and collate the information so that any of those individuals who need to identify a place to get those skills has an easy way of doing that. And that's not straightforward, but that's what we're aiming to do. So it just gives you a flavour. We've just started that work. It's a short, sharp piece of work, and we'll be pulling it together in the next 3 weeks.
That's great, Rob. Thank you very much indeed. Our guests are very welcome to turn their cameras on, by the way, and just as we begin to open the discussions out to members of the committee. But the chair always seems to ask the first question in my experience. So if I may, I like to ask a question around apprenticeship levy, because it's very important that young people get a good start in life. In general terms, it's always hard when you're first starting out in your career, and the pandemic has meant assistance such as work experience and job search training has been necessarily curtailed. May I ask you how you feel we can make the best use of the apprenticeship levy as a means of assisting our young people, and how are we pursuing this with the government? And anyone who feels free to answer that question can do so.
Shall I start, Chair?
Thank you, Lee. Yeah, by means.
I guess that the first thing to say is that the apprenticeship levy is a tax on organisations as a proportion of their payroll for them to set aside funding, or for the government directing them to set aside funding that they might invest in apprenticeship training within their own organisation. The government are also clear, however, that unspent funds are part of the way that the government nationally balances the books when it comes to the overall investment in apprenticeship training that is not paid for by the employer and might be directly funded by the state, particularly for 16 to 18-year-olds who might have their programme funded in that way. And therefore, I guess what employers can do in order to draw down their levy and to make sure it has an impact is to be really clear about what the training needs are within their own organisation. So to be clear what the needs are now and in the future. Of course, an apprenticeship is a job. It's not simply a training course. So they need to have a role for an apprentice to sit in. That the levy should go towards funding the training for the apprentice rather than a wage subsidy. So it's paid in negotiation to the training provider. That might be a college, it might be an independent training provider, and that apprentice starts that journey. What employers need to do to spend the levy is, once they've got clarity about the training needs, it is to find a training partner that can get that apprentice on a programme that perhaps has line of sight to progression. Apprenticeships are available at a range of levels, including at degree level, and they are a good choice for individuals to take, perhaps instead of traditional undergraduate study. But partnership, I think, is the most important way that employers can leverage in the benefit from their apprenticeship levy.
Thank you very much, Lee. Very helpful. I think the next question, or the first question rather, comes from Councillor Douglas. Councillor Douglas, would you like to ask your question?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it's around the evidence base that you're using or creating to back up. I imagine the 1-year skill plan is close to being completed now, but for the 10-year strategy. And I'm particularly interested in how we're truly getting a sense of what the projections are for jobs in different sectors of the economy, and how we're going about making sure that we're ready for that. And I'm particularly interested in green skills, and just looking at our own city, the challenge we're going to have around retrofit of houses, buildings, and also installation of heat source pumps. For example, I believe in the roadmap to net zero for CYC, it says that we need to install about 40,000 heat source pumps, which is going to be a huge task. And you get plenty of projections on green jobs, but it's never very specific actually about what those jobs are. And I'd be interested to know how you've gone about collecting the evidence base, how the green agenda fits into that, and how we think York's going to fulfil training needs, because I think that's the biggest challenge, is upskilling teachers and trainers in order to upskill other people, or teach other people in those areas. So yeah, if you could just talk around that, that would be great. Thank you.
Can I start at the end of that question around the green skills? I think that there is a real issue with matching up what the perceived demand is with what the actual demand is. In particular, and retrofit is an issue close to my heart, particularly given the extensive construction provision that we have in York College. Now, that we have done a lot of work with representatives in the city of the construction centre who talk to us about this demand or need for skills in the future. but actually we're yet to stimulate enough demand to make that provision economically viable in order to offer it in any substantial way within the city. And whilst there are a number of large players within the construction sector, it's actually hangs a lot on access to either sole traders, individual contractors, or SMEs who are subcontractors in long chains of housing development when contracts are let. And imagining those individuals giving up paid work to invest in training for a policy which is some years out, it is somewhat of a challenge, I think. But it's certainly an issue that we are live to and in direct dialogue with colleagues in the construction sector about. I personally feel less concerned about reskilling the teacher and trainer workforce, because those staff are in many ways captive within our institutions, and we can deploy them and direct them to training and reskilling as part of that ongoing endeavour to make sure that we've got the skills within our workforces. That the greater challenge, I think, is stimulating interest in particular areas as they emerge over time. In terms of the evidence base, where you started, we are trying to pull together a number of complex sources, and I know that Amanda, Alison, and perhaps Simon will also have a view on this, but there are evidence sources available through the local enterprise partnership. There's evidence available through Job Centre Plus about vacancies. That tends to have a more short-term focus to it. What are the things that I can see now or in a couple of years' time? One of the reasons that we wanted to have pluralistic voices from employers in that board was to try and help us see out beyond the vacancies which are currently being advertised, and what sorts of investments that those businesses are making in the medium to long term, and how they expect their businesses to change over time, so that instead of getting to a position where somebody needs somebody to do this skilled role now or tomorrow, we can start to imagine what that skilled role might be like in 5, 6, 7 years' time. And the most important reason for doing that, of course, is that skills acquisition is not a button that you press. It's an experience that you give to people over a period of time, most often 2 or 3 years, and therefore it's really important to be able to see out over a substantial time horizon, which is what colleagues in the local authorities economic development team are helping us to do, with access to the data that they've got with longer term employment trends, as well as employers themselves sharing their thoughts about where they're investing and where they're pointing to in the future.
Thank you very much, Lee. I think the next question is Councillor Taylor, indicated first.
Well, thank you, Chair. I think we can be pleased that there's some very good and positive messages here in the paper on the 1-year plan and in the contributions of the speakers. To read on page 19 of the appendix that York is the UK city with the lowest percentage increase in unemployment is really good news. I appreciate we're not out of the woods yet. However, I would like to draw out one anomaly. We also read on page 17 in the same appendix that the loss of customer-facing activities in retail, arts, tourism and hospitality sectors has led to a significant reduction in the number of employees needed. But how do we reconcile that with the headline in the local paper last week, which claimed that there was a crisis in the shortage of chefs in the city as indoor hospitality started to reopen? Do we perceive this to be a problem? And I don't know who is the best person to respond to it, but it seems to me that that's less likely to be about the pandemic. Is Brexit responsible for driving away overseas kitchen staff? Or have chefs just found better paid jobs with more sociable hours and working in busy kitchens?
Amanda, please.
Yeah, I was going to agree with Councillor Stubbney's interpretation of that. This is a national crisis for chefs, or a national issue, so it's not just reflective of York. And it isn't, as far as we know, it's not Brexit related. it is about the lack of people going into chefing as a career. So I think we can try in some ways to tackle this within York, but this is a national issue, and probably actually Lee from the college, because obviously you've got catering within your curriculum, is probably even better placed to speak than I am.
Lee, do you want to come in on that one?
I think this is complex. In fact, yesterday I heard an interview on the radio with somebody from this sector talking about the vulnerability that the hospitality workforce felt during the pandemic when there was furlough, and seeing where other sectors weren't affected, like construction. And the example given yesterday was a head chef who had retrained to become a painter and decorator and could immediately get back to 100% salary rather than the 80% offered through furlough, and indeed to exceed their earnings. And as you indicated, Councillor Taylor, perhaps with a more structured week than you might enjoy in the hospitality sector. In my own institution, we've just advertised for a head chef, and 3 weeks ago we advertised for some personal tutors, and we had 300 applications for those roles. We advertised for a head chef in our catering provision, and we had 3 applications for that role. So I think the issues are complex about what's happened to that workforce and where that workforce has sought solace and potentially what they perceive as greater security than perhaps they otherwise have. In terms of student recruitment to those programs, that's very strong. We're not seeing a reduction in the number of students that are interested in hospitality and catering programs, and they're the individuals that in 3-4 years' time will be emerging from our institution and from other providers across the city with the skills and abilities to undertake those roles, but of course they're not oven ready yet, as it were. That, no pun intended. But they're there, and they're engaging in those courses.
Thank you very much, Lee.
Thank you for your responses, and Amanda as well. I think this will be an issue in a city like York with the amounts of hospitality that we rely upon. Thanks.
Councillor Norman, I believe you were indicating next.
Yes, thank you. Cheers. And I have a brief point back to Claire's question, which is not my main question, and I'm not expecting necessarily an answer on, but just to stress that I think it's quite high on the government's agenda at the moment with regards to green jobs that we start looking more at reskilling and similar from an agricultural and a rural perspective. It would be interesting to hear from Tim on that potentially. But back to my main point of the question, which was I note that there's some discussion in the paper about healthcare jobs and the potential increase of those during the pandemic. And I have a small interest in that, having lost my job during the pandemic and joined the healthcare sector. I guess my question really is with regards to that and with regards to training, which is obviously quite essential really to a large swathe of healthcare jobs. What kind of interactions are we having with the CCGs and with those other key stakeholders in the sort of direct employment sector? Because it strikes me that they're somewhat more hands-on involved in training than certain other employers sometimes are, perhaps.
Would someone like to take up that point?
Hi, it's Alison. I can explain what's happening from a job centre plus reskilling opportunity. So it has been one of the sectors where there's been a lot of immediate starts, and the need, as you can imagine, it was great. There's a volume needed there. Obviously, we do still have pipeline programmes through our colleges, but working closely with the job centre, they put on things called sector work academy programmes. And this is where they engage directly with an employer who has those real life vacancies, and over a number of weeks will help prepare people to enter that workforce and get the minimum level of qualification needed for that particular job. So we're very much working closely with them. It's a program the DWP runs, but what we also do is where, say for instance, through the council, we run the Future Goals programs, our employment hub. we join up to ensure that participants on our programmes are aware of those opportunities, and equally we put the job centre in contact with kind of our healthcare workforce development colleagues within the council to sort of look at the opportunities to run some more of those sessions on a local basis.
Right, thank you, Alison, very much. Councillor Douglas.
Sorry about that. I just noticed that Rob came on camera and wondered if he wanted to say something around that. Was that your intention, Rob?
Thank you. I could just add that we are growing our healthcare provision at York St John, so that's part of, you know, growing the provision for the city and region. So, for example, nursing's coming on stream, paramedic science, and so on. So there is a growth in the amount of healthcare provision at that higher level in the city.
Sorry, Claire, but just to come back on this again, I guess kind of my point and my query really was that in the healthcare sector in the city, you have a sort of strange situation in that there are overarching bodies who deal with a lot of smaller organisations who, you know, have jobs and employment that are going. It's basically what a CCG is to a greater or lesser extent, and it strikes me as if it would be useful for this if healthcare is the large developing sector that we're experiencing at the moment during the pandemic, that it would be quite useful to have the CCG involved in conversations around employment and reskilling.
Okay, sorry.
I was just going to say, I think that's a very good point, actually, and something that perhaps we can look to responding to in the short term. The medium-term plan clearly has got a focus on those sectors that are expanding, and healthcare is very clear within that. I think what Rob Moulton has just touched on in terms of expansion of training, identify some of the challenges, obviously, with the health sector, and that often there's quite a long training program needed to get people to the level where they can really contribute, where some of the vacancies are. But you're absolutely right, the health sector in York is one of the biggest employers in the city, alongside the council and the universities, a real key anchor institution, and not surprisingly getting their attention at the moment to get involved in more kind of strategic thinking is a wee bit challenging, but I think as we emerge from the pandemic, hopefully there'll be a bit more a bandwidth in terms of them getting involved in this kind of thing. And I think we can take that away and try and get them involved.
Thank you, Simon. That's very, very helpful. Maxine, you're indicating.
Yes, yeah, I just wanted to say that it's important to begin to take the opportunity to join this up with the NHS 10-year plan, and also the work that's going on around the integrated care system locally. So, you know, so that place-based approach to the development of health, I think, is going to be an important strand in the work. And also not to ignore the fact that we also, as City of York Council, have health professionals embedded within our teams in terms of our public health colleagues. So, you know, some of the work that we do to support things like the training and development needs of the Healthy Child Service, for example, are ways in which we internally are looking at those training and development needs, and certainly around use of future apprenticeship funding.
Thank you, Maxine. Does any member of the board want to respond to that in any way?
Just to add, Chair, that in this sector specifically, it is an area where a number of us are making investments, particularly around health and social care, the kind of allied health professions, and where certainly between York College and York St John, there are clear progression ladders from level 2 to level 3 into programmes up to levels 4, 5 and 6 at the university. And that's exactly the benefit, I think, of coming together to make sure that there are entry and exit routes at a range of levels with that. And again, we are in dialogue with some of the main providers in the city for anticipating their training needs now and in the future, to make sure that we are providing an offer which meets those needs.
Right, thank you, Billy. Councillor Douglas.
Right, I'm coming back to the question I had a while ago, and And so it's really around how the board tackles and balances the fact that as a city, our strategy generally tends to be to attract higher value jobs and training opportunities. But this never gets away from the fact that there is a huge range of skill levels, experience levels. If people are moving out of one industry in the mid point of their career and into another, then not everybody is going to move into graduate level jobs, for example. I kind of, that's an extreme, but I think you know that job creation can tend to focus around that kind of end. And I'm just wondering how the board is making sure that that necessity to plan across the skill and experience range is always in mind, and quite how you achieve that, and don't forget people that possibly could be left behind in that agenda.
Someone like to pick that one up?
Yes, I'm happy to pick that one up, as I'm the voice that comes in on that, and Lee and the rest of the team will recognise that in order to make sure that all communities and that all levels of jobs are involved is important. And I think what has been very telling through the pandemic is that we now have much greater connectivity between council and partners and the many micro businesses, self-employed people within the city, the thousands who cumulatively make up the bulk of the workforce, that in the past we haven't really had that good a connection with. So in order to listen to the needs of people moving into self-employment, and also across, as you described, Councillor Douglas, from one career path to another, and having myself translated from being a chocolate physicist to a railway accountant and then into this, you know, people do need help to bridge those gaps, and there are a number of organisations in the city who are giving information on how it is that people are doing that and the policy changes that can be implemented to assist that career progression. So I think it is something that is included, and I know that Simon Britton has been very much involved in that connectivity and bringing that information in, along with Alison and Maxine.
Thank you, Councillor Waller. Next on my list is Councillor Pearson.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I was wondering what work has been done in pulling together this sort of one-year plan to engage with the big industries in the city. I'm thinking of the likes of Nestle, and I'm also thinking of the likes of Network Rail and all of the jobs that the rail industry supports in the city, as to how we've engaged with employers and what they need in terms of skills, so that we can ensure that we are delivering the skills and qualifications and training that employers are requesting and wanting.
Shall I come in on that? So, I mean, with regard specifically to those two examples that you raised there, we've been in touch with Nestle twice in the last week or so around their longer term plans in York. Obviously, there's some recent headlines around some jobs that might be disappearing from their factory in York, but to make sure that their long-term plans still very much include the city, and to make sure we understand where they're going on that. With regard to the rail industry, we've been talking with the National Skills Academy for Rail about their longer-term aspirations for the rail industry, and make sure that we're working alongside them in terms of thinking how we can make sure we keep the rail industry as a real strong employer in the city, and we recognise where they think the sector's going. In terms of our evidence base, we obviously there's various models that we're using which can try and map out what employment might look like over the next 10 years. They are models rather than true crystal ball gazing, but they're helpful in terms of showing how employment might change within those key sectors. And you know, it's, as you said, it's very important that we make sure we recognise a balance of different types of jobs across that, and that there are many opportunities within that for people to change mid-working life rather than just enter on leaving school. So a whole series of kind of complicated factors to play into that. Working with, say, with things like their key sector skills academies and those who are planning more generally for sectors, and then talking to some of the key employers in the city. So a mixture of approaches depending on sector and depending on how well connected we are with different businesses. I don't know if Alison wants to add anything to that.
I will, thank you, Simon. Just to add, in terms of the work that helped shape the one-year plan in particular last year, it was all of the existing business engagement as well as some targeted work that we did. So the Make It York business surveys at the very start of the pandemic, the economic team and Make It York business roundtables. It was about joining up those conversations and picking up those skills messaging and following that through where we could without creating additional engagement at that time. What we also did, working with partners at the university, is work with some of the students to do direct engagement with some of those bigger businesses in particular that you mentioned, to try and understand what their plans as an organisation are for the city as an employer, but also to get a feel for the sector trends that would be kind of emerging over that 12 months and into that 2 to 5 year period. So we did a piece, and Amanda was key with the University of York in that, and more recently working with another group of students to kind of get their view on what some of those 21st century jobs might be from people that potentially would be emerging into the market to take on those jobs. So that would help shape the longer term strategy.
Thank you, Alison. Councillor Hollier, can I turn to you now?
Chair, I guess it's just really about the capacity that exists within the system as a whole. I think probably as the sort of furlough scheme sort of either tapers off or comes to a bit of a cliff edge over the next few months, I guess all expectations would be that quite a number of people would need some sort of reskilling or retraining or entering the market. So it's just really whether, you know, if you sort of foresee any sort of capacity issues around that sort of end of September time, and what sort of possibly could be sort of put in place or is being thought about at the moment to sort of deal with what could be quite a large number of people entering this space.
Perhaps if I just start a little on the kind of stats on that, I think, you know, you're right, it's something we've been flagging over a year now, in the number of people who are furloughed in York. Councillor Taylor mentioned the statistics there are in terms of York being the place that's seen the smallest increase in unemployment over the pandemic. We're also in the top 5 of the places for the percentage of people furloughed. And I think the two things are actually closely related. I think the sense that we're getting at the moment is that those businesses that have still got staff furloughed now, a year in, got them furloughed because I think they've got jobs to come back to, and we are less concerned that a significant percentage of those are going to be out of work in September. However, having said that, we've already seen another 3,000 or so people out of work than were before the pandemic, and there's some challenges around that. Those employers who are shedding staff at the moment, and in some ways the better employers are notifying us at the moment. So, you know, we'll have seen for instance, the work around John Lewis closing their store, and also I've already touched on Nestle. You know, there are active conversations around what's needed in terms of helping those people perhaps reskill to change career, and I think there's some very helpful conversations going on around that, which at the moment aren't identifying. I don't think that there is a significant capacity gap. Clearly, if we had 3,000 people all wanting to do the same course, I think Lee and colleagues would probably be a little bit challenged by that if they all wanted to do the same thing. But we need to keep a weather eye on that, but I think our sense at the moment is, while it's clearly very difficult for those people who've lost their jobs, and we need to be very conscious that we've got the right kind of safety net there for what happens in September. We're prepared for whatever we need to do, but our expectation is that we are going to be able to cope with what comes forward.
Right, thank you, Simon. Councillor Hook.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wanting to get Dr. Whitaker involved in the conversation as well, given that I'm the councillor that Askham Bryan sits in my ward. And I mean, agriculture is very different. And throughout my training in history and everything, it's always been that agriculture is a lower employer, ever decreasing. And I just wondered, how are any jobs being created in that sector, or where they, for the students, what they're going to be doing in the future, because that's obviously vocational, but it's also good for people who are not necessarily interested in business. It's a very different set of skills. And since we want to cover everyone with lots of different skills, whether there are openings there that are growing. Sorry, didn't put that very well, did I?
Tim, would you like to respond to that? Are you there? No, perhaps you'll come back to us, Councillor Hook, if he's able to rejoin. Councillor Norman.
Hello. Yes. Sorry. Yeah. Just a brief one for our representatives from universities, I suppose, as much as anything here. And for context, for those of you who don't know me, I'm City Councillor for Hull Road Ward, so I represent the University of York campuses and sort of surrounding areas. And I am perpetually told by student residents, sort of getting towards this time of year, I think it'll be in a couple of months' time when I'll first start hearing it properly, that they love to stay in the city, but that they cannot afford to on the jobs that are available in the city, on the degrees and skills and qualifications that they have. And I think it's fair to say that that is quite a universal experience in comparison to some other university cities that I know, that the skills flight from York is really quite significant. And obviously most of that is to do with affordable, a lot of it is to do with affordability, but also a lot of it is presumably to do with jobs and the kinds of skills that people come out of degrees with not matching up to jobs in the city. So I guess kind of for the universities, how are we tackling that problem? What's the kind of approach in your mind to that?
I'd like to answer that one.
Shall I kick off from the University of York?
Please do, yes.
Yeah, I think you have highlighted an issue. We know, I think from both universities, that our students do want to stay in the city, and many of them do take jobs that aren't at graduate level. I think one of the things we're trying to do at the University of York is engage more with the SME community to help them recognise the value of our graduates, because you're right, we don't have the PwC or the large government yet, the large government bodies here. And so very often students are looking for that kind of big glossy employer and forget quite often the SMEs. So one of the things we're doing at the moment in York, and have done for a while, is develop more and more opportunities for our students to take internships or work placements with our SMEs across the city, in the hope that that educates both parties, both from the student perspective, seeing the breadth of opportunity you can get in an SME. So you don't just go into a single job very often in an SME. You have a much broader experience from working in that company, but also from the SME's perspective, to help them recognise that a graduate from one of the universities in York is a really good employee. And yes, they may have to invest some time to train them in some technical areas, but actually from both universities, we provide exceptionally highly skilled graduates with transferable skills that are applicable to those SMEs across the city. So I think that's one way that we're looking at trying to raise employment for our graduates in the city. I don't know if Rob's got anything from York St John's perspective.
Thanks, Amanda. Very, very similar, actually. It's about ensuring that we connect with a range of businesses in and around the city for placements and other activities, and focusing on SMEs as well. We're also focusing at the moment on social enterprises, which is a sector that's growing, to make sure that we are connecting and we're putting our graduates into the right jobs with the right businesses. There is still an issue of affordability, in particular of accommodation in York, and that's slightly trickier for us to deal with, unfortunately.
Thank you, Rob. I see Tim Whitaker is now indicating. Tim, do you want to come back to us?
Yeah. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. So my apologies. I couldn't unmute. I did hear the question.
Don't worry.
So you don't need to repeat the question. I think as a general comment would be that the opportunities and the numbers of students that we're seeing coming through are increasing. We had a 13% rise in the number of 16 to 19-year-old students at York at Askham Bryan. We've had that this year, and we're seeing a sort of a similar trend this coming year. So I think the numbers are very strong. I think, sort of reiterating Lee's comments about some of the challenges that we face are around responding to future need. What we do know for certain is that we're going to have to produce. We're going to have to be more productive in the way that we produce food, but we're going to have to be more sustainable, and we're going to have to produce food to a higher welfare standard. So a large part of what we're doing is looking at the resource needs, the investment we need to best skill our students around those drivers. So it's that's a very sort of important part of the work that we're doing in terms of that skills agenda. But in terms of numbers of students, it is very strong. I think the other challenge that we face is we know that post-Brexit we will be having for want of a better word, a recalibration on the way in which we manage the land. And as we come out of the Common Agricultural Policy and our Pillar 1, Pillar 2 payment schemes that farmers currently get, there'll be much more emphasis on environmentally sustainable food production, but how we treat our environment. But at this point, that whole sort of policy concept, which is broadly called ELMS, the Environmental Land Management Scheme, we don't know what it is. It hasn't been set, so it is difficult to skill and train people specifically when we don't know what those skills will be. But I think I'll give you assurance that we're very much investing in our resources and our staff to enable us to do that. And we work very closely with industry across all levels, both locally but also on a national level as well. We're very much engaged with those sort of sector leading organisations that are driving those agendas, right into sort of Secretary of State level within government. So I think I'll stop there. I'm obviously happy to take further questions.
Thank you, Tim. That's very helpful. Any questions, any further questions on this agenda item, members? I'm not seeing any blue hands, so unless I see a blue hand, I should move on to the next agenda item. Okay. Item 5 is the Oversight of the Skills Board and the reporting mechanisms. Now, obviously, we've considered the immediate need to recover from the pandemic, but this agenda item provides an update on the work of the Skills and Employment Board in developing a much longer 10-year strategy. Can I ask Alison once again to give us a brief 5-minute introduction to this topic by introducing her report under agenda item 5.
Absolutely, and
Thank you.
apologies, they do obviously flow one into the other, so
Yes,
there will be some parallels or repetition. I think the key thing to say is that the Skills Board, as you know, chaired by Lee and the partners on that board, meet very regularly. We've now met 6 times, the board has, so roughly monthly since the back end of last year, directly informing and shaping that work. So most recently, and the paper talks about this, we were looking at emerging priorities and actually the focus for the partnership, because you know, we could all raise something today that we think is really, really important, but actually it's about what's deliverable, what's the right focus for the city, and what is it in particular that this partnership needs to come together to drive forward over that 2 to 5 year, with that view to a 10-year horizon. That work is still ongoing. We've got a really strong draft shaping up, and one thing I haven't mentioned, which again I think really reaffirms that partnership and the quality of the evidence base we're building, is that the partnership procured the support of a consultant back end of last year, and that work continues to help us write this strategy, but help us build that evidence base, pulling on all of those external sources that Lee's mentioned, particularly the emerging intelligence from the local enterprise partnerships, obviously announcements from government, most recently the FE white paper, and really building in that wider context to the work that we're doing. So as I say, that work's ongoing. What we're looking to do as well, and Simon can give more details as needed, is with the economic growth strategy consultation that's starting imminently and running through the rest of this year. Again, building on what I said around not wanting to go back to businesses in particular, but wider stakeholders multiple times to ask different versions of questions. We want to join up that engagement as a city and have that one conversation where we can. Picking up on Councillor Pearson's point though, there are key sectors or stakeholders that we will need to speak to in more detail around skills. So that's what we will look to do based on the prioritisation and the emerging themes that are coming out from all of this work. And again, that's where the consultant really helps to inform and share that intelligence with the board so they can make the decisions and set that strategic priority. So that's where we are at the moment. The work that we've been doing on the 1-year plan is not in a silo. That is setting the foundations, and those commitment areas continue into that longer term period. And I think Lee summed it up at the beginning very well in saying it's almost 3 chapters. You know, the 1-year plan isn't a start and end in its own right.
Right, thank you very much, Alison. Perhaps Lee, you'd like to say a few words about Oversight of the Skills Board and its reporting mechanisms, and the approach the partnership is taking in developing the strategy for the longer term.
Thank you, Chair. I guess ultimately our accountability is to the city and to the employers that benefit from the work that we develop. Each of the partners within the board is contributing to a strategy which is ultimately making sure that we've got the right skills and education offer that enables people to move into meaningful employment. Each member of the board will have their own accountability mechanism back to their own institution, their own business, for Councillor Waller back to other elected members within the authority, and each brings our contribution in that regard. But ultimately it is a partnership of volunteers who have perhaps got an interest in benefiting from this, but an interest in making sure that the strategy is right. I think accountability in terms of what we deliver will also be enhanced in the coming 18-month to 24-month period as the government rolls out its commitment to local areas having local skills improvement plans, where employer representative bodies will be expected to agree a plan for an area. And in many ways, we're ahead of government's thinking in this. We'll have a plan for our area, which will be endorsed by the board, and the providers will be expected to sign up to delivering that plan as part of a new accountability regime with central government through the Funding Council. and therefore we'll continue in that way, I think, in both developing strategy. I guess from a local authority perspective, ultimately, if we've done our job well, we'll see people well matched into jobs. We'll see employers reporting that they can find access to the talent within the city or the immediate environment outside to fill roles that they've got, and we'll see people in sustained employment in a very simplistic sense. That's ultimately why we're investing in the education skills that we're setting out to deliver.
Thank you, Lee.
Chair, if I can just
come
in at that point in terms of the investment that's come through from government through the LEPs, there were some schemes that have been accelerated, and tribute to York College on the electric vehicle unit there, and for Askham Bryan for their digital training hub. And that's been very tangible examples of where the local providers have responded very quickly to those projects which are looking ahead to the scheme. So I think we do need to get the message out there that there has been a very rapid turnaround to some of the short-term releases of funding, and then looking ahead to the longer term, which I think a number of questions earlier on were about the green jobs, and the LGA has done quite a breakdown of where those could come through. And I think we had a bit of a false start with the £3 billion green homes scheme that the government announced, and then realised that they hadn't really engaged at a local level well enough for that to succeed and to feed into businesses. So that's something that we're looking forward to being able to assist.
Thank you, Councillor Waller. I think once again, taking Chair's prerogative, I'll ask the first question, if I may, of the board. With a long career in economic development in York behind me, I know how difficult it can be to match training provision to trainee needs. I know employers have been closely involved in the board's discussions and deliberations. How challenging have they found the task of deciding what skills will be in demand in the years ahead? I've always thought that was a hard ask for any employer. So over to you, if I may.
Thank you, Chair. I was hoping that you might proffer the answer for us, but ultimately the silver bullet that we're looking for. I mean, I think employers have found it quite difficult to see out into the medium to long term about their business, and it's fair to say, my own organisation too, that we've been very much dealing with the here and now in responding to the consequences of the pandemic and the things that's meant. I think one of the jobs that we are trying to do is to help employers understand how to articulate what their needs are now and in the future. And one of the things that we've had to regularly remind ourselves of is that we often use some clumsy shorthand, which perhaps isn't helpful in the debate. So we talk about employers as if there is some coherent cabinet that one can go to get advice about skills now and in the future. And actually, even when you get into sector by sector, there are divergent views of employers within sectors. But what we can do, I think, through the sector work that we've identified is pick out what we see as cross-cutting themes, and we're seeing some cross-cutting themes in creativity, in digital, and playing that back to employers, I think, will help them to articulate to us on the supply side, as it were, what their needs are over a relatively medium-term horizon, so we can slot in the products, if you like, that are required to meet needs. There is a challenge, I think, in keeping that head up towards the horizon, in looking at skills acquisition, because, of course, trying to deliver skills is not something that we just do now, but people have got to get on a kind of conveyor belt, as it were, and acquire those skills and practice them and finesse them over a period of time, particularly those skills which are at the higher levels, where it's a much longer term mode of acquisition. for skills, and helping employers to see out, I think it is one of the jobs that we'll do by helping them understand how to articulate their needs to us.
Yes, thank you, Lee. A second question would be, what new training do you think will be required to meet the skills needed for new green jobs, which we hope will be to come, and to ensure that we have the skills to attract these key sources of investment in the city? Now, we all know that York is an openly prosperous city, but we're all aware of the pockets of deprivation causing difficulties for local residents who come to us with their problems. Obviously, we do want those new job streams to bring a more equal share of prosperity for families in the years ahead. So is again having the crystal ball to say, well, what will the new jobs be exactly, and what will the new skills be required exactly, to try and match these things up? It's a far harder thing to do than to say. Any thoughts?
I think part of the answer to that question is spotting where those green skills can be slotted into the existing qualifications. So illustratively, in plumbing, starting to think about how that course needs to be adapted to take account of the skills in the future, whether it's ground source heat pumps, or if you're in construction and training in electrical, are you equally qualified to deal with photovoltaics and other skills? So I think there is a job to look at the existing skills and the existing sectors and to work out where additional green skills are required. And Councillor Waller made mention of the electric vehicle investment that's been made in York College, where we have lots and lots of individuals who train in motor vehicle. And actually, if we can bolt in at the start training for them to cope with electric vehicles, then they'll be protected in the longer term in terms of their sustainability. So I think there's a both and answer to this question. There will be very specific skills that are required, which are absolutely 100% in the green space, and there'll be other areas which are adaptations to current qualifications and skills, which enable people to have sustained careers as their sector adapts into the future.
I mean, I think we often assume that these things are happening for the first time, but I think they probably are not happening for the first time. There have been these kind of seismic changes in the past, which have required people to adapt their skills very quickly.
Yes.
And they've by and large risen to the challenge. Councillor Douglas.
Thanks, Chair. I'm going to take us back to the topic of oversight and reporting mechanisms that I think we had moved on to. And I'm just wondering, Lee, what your view is on bringing back reports to Scrutiny so that members and therefore the York's population, our constituents can actually, you can be accountable to the whole city through us as well, and how regularly you might be willing to come back and on what basis. That would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Douglas. At the risk of appearing to dodge a question, that might be a question for Councillor Waller. On the basis that I think that, speaking from my own perspective, our institution is accountable to our governing body, and the contribution that we make in terms of our contribution to skills in the city is discharged through that accountability regime, as it were. And this is a partnership which is about trying to cohere organisations around a common agenda, rather than to grab for space that is properly the business of somebody else. So I don't think it is necessarily as straightforward as saying that there's a single line of accountability for this partnership into one place or another. That said, I do think that through Councillor Waller there is an opportunity for us to report more frequently to elected members and through officers in the council about the work that we're doing, to make sure that everybody's as cited on it as well as they can be.
As well, do you want to make any comments?
Yes. I think that in the days of EMAPs, executive member and advisory panels, then all of these could be combined in one. As you will notice, the two reports have been to my decision session, and very happy to have input to those. I think in terms of the 10-year plan, there is the intention to, as there was a joint session between this board and the ENS Scrutiny Committee chaired by Councillor Baker, that before this 10-year plan goes through executive, which again is another democratic process, that there would be a similar discussion there, so that you've got the quarterly economic update from which is written by Simon Brereton, which comes to my decision session. So there's the opportunity there.
Thank you very much, Councillor Waller. Do you have supplementary, Councillor Douglas?
Thank you, Chair. So when would that be then, Councillor Waller, the 10-year strategy coming through to executive?
That would be,
and when could that come back to
towards
the scrutiny
back end of this year? So it would be around about September to have a similar session that we had in late February, when the 1 year strategy was discussed, and the comments that were made by Scrutiny were taken up by Alison and weaved into the strategy there. So it would be around about the autumn.
Thank you very much. Councillor Norman.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's really useful that a lot of work is going on at the moment, and I think in particular the continued stressing of the holisticness of this approach being really important is an important one. But I do think that makes me question as to whether or not it would be sensible perhaps to have something that is as constantly evolving as skills training and jobs within the city, routinely coming back to the committee that is scrutinising the economic situation as it develops in York. And I do wonder if more frequent reporting on this 1 year plan might be useful from our perspective. And in particular, and I totally empathise with the importance of the role of the executive member in being the council's voice on that committee. I think that holistic approach, the reason for that being important is because it's bringing stakeholders together. And I think part of the real value that we've had so far in this session has been the ability to talk openly and honestly with you as key stakeholders and question you and have your input and ideas. And I think it would be really useful to continue that relationship going forwards rather than to terminate it prematurely. But yeah, sorry, it was more of a comment than a query, I suppose. But I think a point worth raising.
Thank you, Councillor Norman. I was going to propose that, having heard Councillor Waller's map outline, if you like, of this progress coming back to him at an executive session, that this committee considers the 10-year strategy in a pre-decision session some point before that goes to Councillor Waller. How would people feel about that? Would it be helpful? Councillor Hollier?
Well, I'd just say that sounds like a sensible approach. In September, you're sort of around the time when we've got past the sort of summer, and we'll start to see what the sort of future landscape will start to look like. So that'll probably be quite a good time to have that sort of pre-decision scrutiny. So
yeah,
second, if you're looking for something.
Thank you. Okay. It just seems to me there's value in both monitoring the immediate discussions around the 1 year skills strategies, as well as the document and employment needs, and also the 10-year one, which of course I imagine will also evolve every now and then anyway, because as we get closer to these dates, we understand more, other things become more clear. So let us do that then, and that will possibly help guide Councillor Waller's thoughts as he deliberates on the 10-year strategy. Right. Well, thank you very much, Councillor Douglas.
Sorry, Chair. I'm just keen that we get that down as a resolution, and
Yep.
I'm not sure that what we've just done necessarily would do that. Do we need to have a vote of committee members to get that on the minutes?
We can do. Quite happy to do that. Should we just have a show of hands on the bringing the Councillor Taylor, do you want to say something first? No. Okay. If we agree with that proposal, then to bring it back before the decision session to help Councillor Waller's deliberations, please show. I think that's everyone. Thank you very much. Right, we've now come to the end of the session on the skills items on the agenda tonight. Our guests from the Skills and Employment Board are welcome, of course, to leave us at this point if they wish. We'd like to thank them all for their commitment tonight and giving us of their time and expertise, and obviously wish them a very good evening and thank you again. So bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Shall we go for our break now, committee members? 10 minutes? Would that seem a good idea if the IT gentleman can move us across into the breakout room? Thank you. Right, everyone. Welcome back to the meeting. We're now on agenda item 6, the update on the in-work poverty review. Now, I've had some background papers from Angela Bilby on this, and I'll just go through what I've put together and see what the committee would like to do. CSMC considered a scoping report on a corporate review of poverty in York on 11th of November 2019, developing from a commitment to consider food poverty in the city. You should have received a copy of this report, which lists the many factors which contribute to the problem. It was agreed at CSMC that each standing scrutiny committee would set its own remit, gathering its information and reporting back to CSMC with an agreed final report. CSMC would then produce a corporate report for submission to executive. Economy in Place was given the task of researching and reporting on in-work poverty, and our then committee clerk, Steve Entwistle, brought a report to this committee on 13th November, focusing on wages, hours of working, in-work benefit cuts, and the gender pay gap. To assist the members' considerations, representatives from the University of York, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, Yorkshire and Humber TUC, and the major York retailer also joined the meeting. You should have received a copy of this report dated 13th November 2019. The meetings of the meeting say that the committee considered a wide range of issues with the assistance of the invited guests. But while a number of areas are listed for the committee to consider adding to the work plan, the specific issue of in-work poverty allocated by CSMC is not carried forward. It seems like the pandemic got in the way early in 2020. I've got a way forward. I suggest we ensure that CSMC wish to revisit and proceed with the corporate review into poverty, and if so, they wish EMP consider issues around in-work poverty. That's the first part. If CSMC do wish to proceed as before, we request the Head of Economic Growth to revisit the issue for us and prepare an updated report for the committee to consider, forming the basis for our submission on this issue to CSMC's corporate review. Now, do the committee think that's a sensible way forward? Any thoughts, anyone? Councillor Douglas.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm glad you went through the records and pulled out what we had done, because we actually did make some progress, didn't we? And in fact, you, Councillor Hook, and myself met on a subcommittee to consider this issue as well, when I think we'd had a meeting and then the pandemic struck. Yeah, I think absolutely we should pick this up again, and it would be helpful for Simon to be able to give us a revised kind of outlook on where our challenges in employment and wages are, and the affordability of our city as far as living costs go, and how, you know, that those two marry or don't. I think we know they don't. But I think it would be helpful also to understand within that quite what the council's doing around in-work poverty and what has been done before we choose a route forward and go any further with it. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. Greatly appreciate you going through the background to this, because I think it's happened before I was a member of this committee. Take on board very much Councillor Douglas's points, and in my previous speech on an earlier item this evening, I was referring to, potential of people in the hospitality industry changing jobs because they were fairly lowly paid, and the terms and conditions of those jobs can be quite onerous at times. So I think there is certainly an issue in York, as we know. We all know that there is an issue of work poverty. The other thing I have to say is I think CSMC needs to revisit this because the world has changed. The world has changed because of COVID, and despite our hopes and beliefs that these large number of people who are still furloughed in York will not lose their jobs. This is our hope, I'm sure. That might not come to pass. So I think if we're looking at the issue of poverty and in its relation to employments, we may have to reconsider where the focus of that ought to be. So CSMC needs to take another view on this before we decide where we're going to go.
Okay. Councillor Hook.
Thank you. Yes, I think this is a very important subject that we shouldn't drop, but yes, definitely an update in the light of changed times is very important. But I mean, I sort of think that trouble is we can't all be biophysicists and get massive jobs, can we? So
no.
And also housing in York is so expensive, but we are looking at the housing situation in another committee. But it's just also linked in really with what we've just been hearing about, getting the right skills and building up your things. So yeah, we should keep going.
Yeah. Would the committee be happy then if I contact the chair of CSMC and ask if they would be content with us picking up from where we left off in November 2019? And do they have any revised instructions for us? Although I think once we consider we're supposed to look at in-work poverty, that's our remit. I think it's down to us to decide what is the most appropriate elements of that to choose. Can I have a show of hands if people are content with me taking that course of action? Councillor Taylor? No.
Sorry, my point was I think really CSMC needs to decide whether they still think that this is the most important thing we ought to be doing in light of what has happened over the last year. Otherwise, I'm relatively happy to continue with this because I think it is an important topic.
I think
that's all I was meaning.
Yes, I understand that. I think really CSMC do have to decide whether or not they want to continue with investigation into poverty. My expectation is they will. I think it's a serious issue for the city. And our element of that, I wish them to confirm that if they are going to do that, that we should carry on with in an in-work poverty examination. Right, I shall do that. Sorry, Councillor Taylor.
I'm happy with that.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you very much. Right. I know Simon's still with us, which is very helpful. Thank you, Simon, for staying on. Would you like to, assuming that the CSMC do ask us to continue in this work, would you like to outline some of the key highlights, if you like, of the sort of work you propose would be useful for us to consider?
Yeah, perhaps I can give that on a bit of a timeline in terms, I mean, clearly it's a key issue in terms of economic strategy for the city. And as we've mentioned earlier, we're doing some broad engagement over the summer around that, and also some targeted engagement as well, which I hope will bring some more evidence. And I think the key thing with things like in-work poverty is it's all very well us discussing that here in a committee meeting or taking the views of professional organisations. What's so often missing in this is the voice of those people who are living through in-work poverty, and that's a really key issue for me in terms of developing the economic strategies, to make sure that we get that lived experience coming through strongly. So there are a couple of angles that I'm pursuing on that, but that's probably not going to bring a voice forward in the next month or two, but I would hope over the summer we'll be bringing those perspectives into the economic strategy work, and I think that might be something that you might want to explore in a bit more detail. So that would suggest taking a bit of a kind of a medium-term run at this, rather than thinking you might deal with it in one session. Immediately, what I could do is to pull together some of the evidence that I've been looking at for a couple of years now, really, with looking for an opportunity to pull this together around the mix of part-time and full-time work, how gender plays into that, and how the different sectors in York play into that. What I would undertake to do in the first instance is to pull together a report summarising that data and to set out before us kind of what the data says in terms of some of those issues, and then to supplement that with some of that lived experience, perhaps a subsequent session. That will all feed well into what we need to say, as I say, in the economic strategy, which will be, that's heading towards executive in December. So it would fit on a similar timeline in terms of what you just talked about in terms of skills, perhaps doing initial report, perhaps in July or time on what the data says, and then bringing back some of the what's coming through from the engagement later on. And if there's an opportunity within that to bring some of those voices forward, I think that would be a good way to supplement this meeting. Alongside of that, the Human Rights Commission have been looking at the establishing a Poverty Truth Commission in York, which is a similar approach. That's being coordinated by Alison Sements and the York CVS, with potentially some of our funding from the Inclusive Growth Fund that Councillor Waller established, and then some funding from the university to supplement that. And we have the Roundtree Foundation engaged in that work too. So that would be an even longer term piece, but hopefully there'll be some to update in terms of progress on that as we go forward. And that Poverty Truth Commission, the point of that work really is to bring together key decision makers with those whose the decisions affect, and to try and improve policy making. But part of it's around working with people who are experiencing poverty to help them self-advocate and enable them to bring their stories to the fore. So I'd say if there's an opportunity to bring that in front of scrutiny, I think that would give you a very strong basis for a really powerful conversation about all of this, which could really help guide our policy development in this really important field over the next few years. The part of the challenge, of course, is we've still got so many moving parts around us, but I think it is a good time to be looking at this, and certainly should inform the economic strategy, which will be work in progress, I guess, but so we're planning to bring back at the end of the year. So hopefully that sets up, I mean, there's a lot of kind of high level stuff in that, but happy to answer any specific questions anyone has at the moment. But that's, to me, would feel like a good timescale to be looking at this, perhaps for me to bring a report back in a couple of months' time, if you can
in the summer
indulge me with more than a week or two to write that up. I'd like to do a good piece of work on that.
I think we all recognise it's a complex issue, complex problem that to do justice to, we shouldn't rush it. It's important that it's properly dealt with for the benefit of your residents. Councillor Douglas.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to really back up what Simon said about the lived experience being really important, and this committee has asked for that previously, and I'd really like us to do the very best we can to bring a voice to us that is really the experience. So I couldn't endorse that more.
Lovely, thank you very much. Any other points that anyone wants to raise this evening? Right, well, we'll go to the chair of CSMC, and I will ask if he still wants to continue with the corporate review into poverty. And I will then ask if is that the case, then is he happy that EMP continues to look into the issue of in-work poverty particularly, and issues around that. Simon, do you have something to say?
No, I think that was...
That's fine. Okay. Right. Well, thank you all very much. I don't have any urgent business for the committee to consider under item 7. So therefore, I declare the meeting closed at 19:20. Thank you all very much.